They laughed when he walked in. They saw a jacket, a crate. A man who didn't belong. What they didn't see was the storm he had walked through to get there. This is not a story about success. It's a story about silence, about being underestimated, and about the quiet power of someone who refuses to give up, even when no one's looking. If stories like these move you, real, human, and honest, hit subscribe and join us. Because sometimes the most powerful voices don't need to shout. Let me tell you about Lee Tran. He was there for less than 3 minutes before someone decided he didn't belong. San Jose's McMillan Convention Center had never looked so polished. Rows of brushed metal chairs stretched like silver dominoes across the vast hall, where spotlights dangled like celestial bodies from the high, gridded ceiling. The Future Tech Disrupt conference was in full swimsuits and sneakers, soy lattes, and spreadsheets, hopeful eyes fixed on screens showing seed funding rounds and cryptographs. A celebration of innovation, of progress, of who mattered. And that's when he walked in. He wasn't tall. He wasn't loud. He didn't carry a laptop or wear a badge. What he did carry was a faded blue delivery backpack that hung slightly to the right, weighed down by the steel container inside still steaming from the ride over. His shoes were practical, worn, black sneakers that once had more tread. His name tag, mostly covered by his coat collar, read, Lee. He paused for a second just past the entrance, squinting as his glasses caught the gleam of stage lights. On the far wall, massive LED screens cycled through sponsor logos, NVIDIA, Stripe, Byte Sparrow. Lee's gaze lingered a little on that last one. He took a tentative step forward. The crowd swirled around him, VCS with toothy smiles, interns juggling iced coffees, TikTokers filming live reactions. None of them looked at him, not really, at best a glance. At worst, a dismissive flick of the eyes that didn't even register as human contact until someone yelled, Hey! Hey, move the food guy. He's blocking the lens. It was a cameraman, white, stocky, early 30s with a headset and a chest rig that looked more complicated than most drones. His assistant, a younger woman in high-top Nikes and a neon windbreaker, glanced over and immediately marched toward Lee. Sir, this isn't the drop-off zone, she said, already annoyed. Catering goes to the loading dock. Lee opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. No, listen, I know it's confusing, but this is the keynote stage. You can't be in here with that thing. He turned his body slightly, revealing more of the strap over his shoulder. His hand rested on the black crate like it was something fragile. Like it mattered. I'm not here to deliver. Okay, but we're live streaming, she snapped, gesturing to the blinking red camera light. We can't have delivery guys blocking the broadcast. Just please take it to the back, all right? People started looking. Not everyone, but enough, a few whispered. One man chuckled and nudged his neighbor. Another gig worker trying to sneak into a TED Talk. A woman with AirPods muttered, probably looking for free coffee. And then the worst one. A kid. Maybe 16. Slicked back hair, designer hoodie, iPad under his arm. He smirked. He thinks this is Uber Eats for billionaires. Someone laughed. A small, sharp laugh that cut through the air like glass. It was that sound, the sound of permission to humiliate, that made Lee flinch. He bowed his head slightly. An old habit, he didn't look at anyone. Just turned back toward the hallway he'd come from, walking slowly. Like someone returning to a place they never wanted to leave in the first place. But the story wasn't done, not even close. Because just outside the hall, down the corridor lined with framed portraits of past speakers, Elon Musk, Satya Nadella, that guy who made the app that guesses your mood based on your breathing, someone was waiting. A woman in a navy blazer, holding a clipboard, eyes wide. Mr. Tran? She called. He turned. Oh, thank God, she exhaled. Where have you been? We're 3 minutes from your keynote. The panel's wrapping. They're introducing you next. And in that moment, just as the sliding doors behind her opened, and the sounds of applause spilled out from the main hall, everything shifted. The man they laughed at? He was the next person to take the stage. He didn't smile right away. He stood there in the hallway, framed by the posters of last year's Unicorn founders, each beaming under stage lights, arms crossed in victory poses. But Lee's arms stayed. At his sides, he looked down at his shoes. The left toe was still wet from the slush puddle he'd stepped in earlier. The brown stain from spilled broth had started to spread on his jacket, faint but visible under the harsh ceiling fluorescence. "Sir?" The woman repeated, softer this time. Her name tag read Mira. She was young South Asian, with a headset in one ear and a sense of rising panic behind her glasses. "They're introducing you. We need to mic you up." Lee nodded, slowly. He stepped forward without a word, just a quiet shift of presence, as if a statue had chosen to walk. Mira turned and led him through a narrow backstage corridor, her footsteps quick, precise. "Your notes are loaded on the teleprompter, and I printed a hard copy just in case." She glanced down at his coat, hesitated. "Do you want a blazer?" "We have backups in the green room, size medium to large." Lee shook his head. "I'm good." She bit her lip. "Okay, we respect founder authenticity here. Just remember, you're closing the session. Investors, journalists, 5 million viewers online." He didn't flinch. What he did do was look back just once at the hallway behind them, where the double doors still swung slowly shut. Through the glass he could see the same boy in the designer hoodie, now scrolling TikTok, half laughing with friends. They had no idea, they had no clue. And he wasn't angry, not really, he was just ready. Backstage, the energy was jittery. A tall producer with a clipboard and wireless headset barked into his mic. "Keynote anchor is in position. Cue intro reel in 30 seconds. And tell Arvind not to go off script again, seriously. This isn't Shark Tank." A makeup artist rushed. "Up with blotting paper. You need a quick touch-up?" Lee blinked. "I'm not wearing anything." The artist blinked back. "Exactly." Mira tried to laugh. "Let's just skip that part. You're up in 20. The music changed low, electronic tones rising under the screen glow. Through the crack in the stage curtain, Lee could see the room. Lights dimmed. A massive screen showed a sleek animation, Byte swirling into a sparrow icon, the logo for Byte Sparrow, his company. Then the voiceover began. "In a world where innovation knows no borders, and resilience often wears unexpected uniforms, please welcome to the stage, Byte Sparrow founder and CEO Lee Tran." Applause, not thunderous, not wild, but steady. Curious. Polite. Expectant. And then the curtain drew back and he stepped out, still in his delivery jacket, still with the crate. He didn't speak right away. The first few rows stared in confusion. A few tilted their heads. Mira stood, frozen just off stage, breath caught between panic and defiance. Someone whispered, "Is this a skit?" Another said, "This guy's kidding, right?" Lee placed the crate down gently at the edge of the stage. Then he looked out past the lights, into the hundreds of faces, and he began, but not with a pitch deck. Not with tech jargon. He started with a story. "I was 11 the first time someone asked if I was the delivery boy," he said, voice calm. "Even. No package. No uniform. Just me walking into my school's gym to pick up my younger sister. Some kid's mom said it. Oh, the delivery boy's here." She didn't even look up from her phone. I didn't correct her. I just stood there, holding my backpack straps, like I was wearing something heavier than books. The room was dead silent. I've been a dishwasher, a stockroom guy, a library intern. I've taken a calculus exams after pulling overnight shifts loading trucks. And I've heard every version of "you're not supposed to be here" since I was a kid. He paused, but I am here. A man in the fourth row lowered his coffee. Lee smiled, not smug, just steady. He continued, I know this. Code isn't what you expect from someone who's raised $140 million. I know it smells faintly of basil and fish sauce, because I picked up lunch for our dev team on the way here. Because they're my family. And because feeding your team is not beneath the CEO, especially when you know what it means to be hungry. He gestured gently to the steel crate beside him. This is the last order I ever delivered. Right before Byte Sparrow launched. Out of a rented laundromat backroom. I kept it, because I never want to forget where I started, or who people thought I was. Then he looked directly at the camera. And if you laughed earlier when I walked into this room, I don't blame. You saw what you were taught to see. Pause, but today you get to see something else. The room shifted. A few people sat up straighter. Mira let out a long, shaky breath backstage. In the front row, the same boy from earlier looked around nervously. His smugness had vanished. His dad gray suit, Bluetooth in ear, was staring at Lee like he'd just realized a coin was double-sided. Lee continued, voice quiet but crystalline. My name is Lee Tran. I'm the son of refugees. I'm an engineer. I'm a brother, a former night janitor. And I am the CEO of the fastest growing cross-language AI platform in the U. He paused again. I was told I didn't belong here. By strangers, by systems, by my own fear. He nodded once, eyes clear. But here I am. He let the silence stretch, not awkward, but intentional. I want to tell you a quick story, he said, fingers gently brushing the rim of the steel crate. About this box. Somewhere in the fifth row, a woman leaned forward, elbows on her knees. A man next to her had stopped typing. Even the camera operators who'd been distractedly checking angles were now staring straight through their viewfinders. I had just finished a shift. This was back in 2019, delivering food to a hedge fund downtown. It was raining, my brakes were shot, and I hadn't eaten since morning. The receptionist took one look at me, soaked, tired, and said, use the service entrance next time. A ripple of discomfort swept through the audience. Lee didn't soften. She didn't know I was also there for a meeting. That I had a pitch deck in my backpack. That the founder I was trying to meet had promised me 10 minutes. I waited in the lobby for an hour and a half, smelling like wet rice paper and engine oil, while interns and Allbirds walked past me like I was invisible. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Eventually the founder canceled. Said he couldn't trust someone who didn't look the part. Now he paused. The crowd had gone completely still, and that's when I realized I wasn't going to wait for a door to open. I'd build the damn door myself. The camera panned slowly across the front row, a mix of VCs, angel investors, and startup founders who were suddenly shifting in their seats. Not from boredom, but from something else. Something heavier. Lee gestured to the giant screen behind him. It flickered to life. Byte Sparrow. We started with 4 laptops, a leaky ceiling, and a borrowed Wi-Fi connection. No incubator. No Y Combinator tag. No Stanford degree. Just this idea. What if machines could learn to speak like us, not just translate, but understand our hearts? The screen displayed a world map dotted with user activity. Then footage of students in Lagos, single mothers in Manila, and immigrant workers in Berlin using Byte Sparrow's voice interface. Today, we help over 42 million users connect across 62 languages. We don't just do speech to text. We bridge dialects, detect cultural context, and give voice to those the world ignores. He stepped forward. We've helped nurses in Vietnam speak to patients in Berlin. We've helped refugee kids reconnect with grandparents across borders. We've helped a deaf child in Fresno talk to her schoolteacher in perfect Spanish. His voice cracked just slightly, and if I had listened to that voice that said, "You don't belong," none of this would exist. A young woman in the Second row wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. An older man, arms crossed, was now nodding slowly. From backstage, Mira whispered into her mic, "Someone tell Livestream to pin this. Don't cut away." Lee looked across the room again. "You know, I almost didn't come today," he said. "I saw my name on the schedule. Then I saw the dress code, business casual. And I thought, what if I wear this coat? The one I wore when we launched. The one I wore when I delivered food to stay afloat." He lifted the sleeve. The faint tear near the wrist was visible. "I told myself, if they laugh, then I'll know I still have work to do." He exhaled. "And I guess I still have work to do." There was a long pause. Then from the back of the hall, someone began to clap, not loud, not thunderous, but real, followed by another dot, then another, until the whole room stood row by row like waves lifting a ship out of stormwater. Not out of politeness, not because it was expected, but because something inside them had been rearranged. Even the boy in the designer hoodie was no longer scrolling. He was standing, looking down at his shoes, like he didn't know where to look anymore. Backstage, Mira pressed her palms to her chest. The host who had introduced Lee with all the enthusiasm of reading from a teleprompter now stood slack-jawed. And Lee? He didn't raise his arms in victory. He didn't shout. He simply nodded once, picked up his old crate, and said, "Thank you for listening. I hope next time, when someone walks in dressed like me, you'll see what I see now, possibility." As he stepped down from the stage, the camera caught one last thing. The logo stitched to his coat. It was old, faded, but visible. Faux LC via San Jose, family owned, since 1994. The same logo on the takeout bags that many in that very room had tossed away without a second glance. And now it had just walked back into the room and rewritten the story. Before the applause, before the speech, before the stunned silence and the standing ovation, there were looks. Not words, looks, and sometimes they hurt worse than anything spoken. It began the moment he walked in. A man wearing a delivery jacket and carrying a steel crate doesn't belong in a room filled with Patagonia vests and black Amiri boots. His shoes squeaked slightly from the rain outside. His breath misted in the over-air-conditioned lobby. But more than anything, it was the way he walked, not rushed, not apologetic, but like he had a purpose that irritated them. Because people like him weren't supposed to look like they belonged. The first look came from a security guard stationed near the entrance to Hall A. He was ex-military, buzz cut, broad build, black gloves. When Lee passed the metal scanner, the guard tensed, shifting his stance as if preparing to intercept. His radio crackled. He didn't touch it. He just stared, like he was waiting for this man to mess up, to cause trouble, to justify the discomfort his presence caused. The second came from a woman with pearl earrings seated by the coffee station. She was mid-sip, perfectly composed, and paused as Lee passed by. She didn't speak. She just curled her lips slightly, a gesture as subtle as it was venomous. Then came the man in the custom blazer, late 40s, tech investor, resting one polished loafer over his knee. His voice was just loud enough. Jesus, they let delivery guys into the pre-seed track now. Laughter from two men beside him. One of them elbowed the other. Must be a beta test for DoorDash Pro. A few seats behind, a woman leaned toward her tablet and typed something fast. Her eyes flitted up and down. A whisper. Is he lost? This is Founders and Funders. Not Founders and Food. More laughter. From the shadows of the room came another voice, high-pitched, immature, careless. Yo, check this out, Uber Eats just dropped off the next unicorn. It was a teenager, barely 16, with a phone in his hand, already filming. His father, seated beside him, didn't look up. He just said, "Stop recording," but not because it was wrong. Just because it was improper. The boy grinned and Kept filming anyway. Lee didn't look at any of them, but he felt it. The way you feel a knife without ever being touched. The way you know someone's already decided your worth based on your shoes. He kept walking toward a seat at the very back. He didn't want the stage yet. He wanted to see. Observe. Remember. But that was the problem. People like him were only allowed to serve, not see. The assistant producer spotted him next. Clipboard in one hand, headset in the other. She squinted. "Excuse me?" "Sir." He turned. "You can't be in this section. This is a restricted tech panel." He said nothing. She stared at the box in his hand, then at his coat. Recognition never came, just assumption. "Food drop-offs at the dock. You need to go through the staff entrance." "I'm not," she cut him off. "I know, but we can't. Have you blocking the camera? These people paid thousands to be here. Just leave it at the back, okay?" From the side, a man in a navy suit with a startup pin said, not unkindly, "Hey bro, I think you got the wrong room. The Postmates lunch order's going to panel B." He winked like he was being helpful, like he was doing Lee a favor, and still he didn't speak. Because when you grow up being other, you learn that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy, and silence, on this day, would speak louder than anything they expected. But not everyone was blind. Not everyone watched with disgust. From a far corner, near the back row, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered. "Why are they yelling at him? He didn't do anything." The mother, wearing scrubs under a cardigan, looked torn. She'd cleaned offices like these after hours. She knew that look. The look that told you, you're a worker, not a witness. She said nothing, but she reached for her daughter's hand, held it tight. As if to say, "Don't forget this moment." Back in the center aisle, someone else noticed who. An elderly man with a tremor in his hand and a press badge that read, "James H. Kim, war correspondent, retired." He watched Lee. Watched the crate, the coat, the silence, and he squinted, like memory was crawling back through the fog of decades. Like he'd seen this before, in another war. In another country, a man judged not by his heart, but by the dirt on his boots. The lights above the main stage began to dim. A soft bell tone signaled 5 minutes until the next session. The whispers continued. A few people snorted. One guy muttered, "Unbelievable. They'll let anyone in now." And yet, through all of it, Lee stood still. He breathed. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the room, but in him. He looked around, really looked, and for the first time that morning, he allowed himself to see not the ridicule, but the small spaces between it. The girl, the mother, the old reporter, the cracks in the concrete. The seeds. He took one breath, then turned toward the door, but not to leave. To get ready. Lee wasn't someone who liked talking about himself. Not because he lacked stories to tell, but because he'd spent most of his life getting used to being overlooked. He never craved recognition. Just one thing. He didn't want anyone else to feel what he had felt: misjudged, dismissed, invisible in rooms built to make people like him feel small. When Mira found him sitting in the back row, clutching a battered delivery bag, her voice trembled. "Where have you been? They're introducing you next." A part of him still couldn't believe it. Not because he thought he didn't belong, but because he'd lived through enough rooms where others were certain he didn't. She looked at his jacket, the food stains, the frayed sleeves, and almost asked if he wanted to change. Then she stopped. Something in his eyes, calm, heavy, unwavering, told her not to. Instead, she just said, "Come with me. We'll get your mic set up backstage." He stood, silent, carrying the metal food crate as if it were something sacred. As they walked toward the wings of the stage, his mind drifted far from the polished floor, past the bright LED banners, back to a train station bench from 11 years ago. He had been curled up on cold metal, arms wrapped around a moldy backpack. Inside was a broken laptop he'd salvaged from an electronics dumpster, He had no apartment, no scholarship, no Wi-Fi, but he had an idea. And a single draft email to a scholarship committee. Please take a look at my AI concept design, not just to translate languages, but to understand human emotion. No one replied. One rainy night, he was riding his bike after a delivery when he saw smoke rising from a low-income housing block. No one had called 911. He threw his bike down and ran inside, banging on doors, yelling. A Vietnamese grandmother was trapped in her kitchen, unable to call for help. He carried her down 3 flights, coughing from the smoke. No one ever asked his name, just one line in the local paper. Unidentified man helps evacuate 7 during fire. That was it. The woman he saved. She was now seated in the front row of this tech conference, completely unaware. She was the mother of a senior marketing executive at one of the biggest AI firms in the valley. The same woman who had snickered earlier when she saw him walk in with that delivery bag 2 years ago. When Byte Sparrow began, no one would fund them. They didn't have Ivy League credentials, no incubators. Just 3 friends, a mechanic, a combat nurse, and a formerly homeless engineer, working through the night in the cramped room behind his mother's faux restaurant. The smell of broth, sweat, and keys clacking on cheap plastic keyboards. They once called a startup summit, asking if they could pitch. A receptionist said, "We're prioritizing Stanford or Harvard-affiliated founders." He hung up, smiled, then kept building when a refugee child used Byte Sparrow to apply for a scholarship and got it. The world began to notice. A small article ran, "New language tech bridges kids and countries." Then a frontline doctor used it to say goodbye to his dying mother overseas. But even during all that, Lee kept delivering food at night. And that old steel crate, he couldn't throw it away. It reminded him that the hands that built Byte Sparrow were the same ones that carried soup bowls for years to stay alive. Backstage, Mira tried not to fumble the mic pack as she clipped it to his collar. "Do you want to change into something more formal?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No, they need to see me like this." She froze. She remembered being denied access to an elevator once because she didn't look like a staff member. And suddenly, she understood exactly what he meant, without him needing to explain. In the tech booth, a live stream editor scanned the monitors. On a whim, he opened a backup file from 2020, a news clip titled, "Delivery Man Saves 7 from Fire, Disappears Before Being Identified." The moment the face appeared on screen, he gasped, "Holy *T. It's him." At that very moment, an urgent email flashed in the inbox of the event's organizing team. From former San Jose Mayor Linda Hine, subject, "Keynote speaker was mistakenly removed from the venue." Message, "That man saved my life in a 2015 car crash. I insist a public apology be issued." Meanwhile, seated near the front, a venture capitalist stared blankly at the stage. Last year, he declined Lee's pitch email. His internal note, "Founder lacks brand vision. Doesn't look like a tech leader." Now he was sweating through his undershirt. A young girl in the 3rd row tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "I know him. He's the one who gave me the app to read in Vietnamese. The one I used to write you that letter." Her mother, an immigrant janitor attending the conference on a gifted ticket, turned to look at the man stepping on stage. Her chest tightened. None of them knew that the man they laughed at today was the same man who had quietly changed, or even saved, parts of their lives. And now he didn't need revenge. He didn't need to shout. He just needed to walk into the light and let the truth do the rest. The applause was still ringing in their ears when he stepped off the stage, not the kind of applause you give a polished keynote speaker or a tech darling with numbers on a slide. No, this was different. It was awkward at first, hesitant, but it had built like a tide pulled in against its will until everyone stood, clapping because they didn't know What else to do with the knot tightening in their chests? Lee didn't stay to soak it in. He walked backstage, set the metal crate down gently beside the wall, and quietly removed the mic from his collar. Mira rushed toward him, eyes wide. "You crushed it," she said, almost whispering. "You actually, Jesus, did you feel that?" He nodded, slowly. "I felt seen." Then came the real show. Back out in the hall, the air buzzed with confusion. Wait, was that real? I thought it was a social experiment. He was actually the CEO. A woman in snakeskin heels was the first to try and recover. She elbowed the man beside her, laughing nervously. Well, I knew. The humility act was so deliberate. Clearly a branding tactic. The man nodded, not because he agreed, but because he'd been one of the first to scoff earlier, and now his palms were sweaty. Further down the row, a college-age startup founder whispered to his mentor, "Dude, that was the guy I offered $5 to carry my laptop bag." The mentor just stared at him, blinking. "Oh my God," the kid added. "I think I'm going viral for this, aren't I?" He wasn't wrong. Up in the control booth, the livestream editor had clipped the whole segment and posted it to Twitter with the caption, "They called him the delivery guy." He called them out with grace. #BiteSparrow CEO. By the time Lee sat down in the green room and took a sip of lukewarm water, the clip had been viewed 1.2 million times. And counting. Back in the lounge, the same cameraman who had shouted, "He's blocking the lens," earlier now stood in a corner, uncharacteristically quiet. His assistant, the one with the windbreaker and the fast mouth, was Googling BiteSparrow stock valuation like her life depended on it. She muttered. "How was I supposed to know?" "He had a box," the cameraman whispered. "It was a nice box," she shot back. "Well built, industrial grade. That should have been the giveaway." "You told him to go out the back. You yelled at him." They both fell silent. Then, like two guilty kids, they turned toward the hallway where Lee had disappeared. "Should we, say something?" "Say what?" "Sorry we treated you like a stray dog because you weren't wearing a badge." "He wasn't wearing a badge," the cameraman offered weakly, as if that somehow justified it. Meanwhile, outside the convention center, a food truck vendor was leaning on his counter, watching the clip on his phone. "Yo," he called to his partner inside the truck. "That's the guy who used to order 2 ban humdi and tip $50 every time. For real?" "Yeah, never said much. Just smiled. Paid in cash." "Damn," the partner muttered. "I knew he was too nice to be normal." Inside the VIP room, where the chairs were softer and the air smelled faintly of lavender essential oil and inherited wealth, the awkwardness had reached nuclear levels. 3 executives who had shared a private laugh about doorstep CEOs earlier were now scrolling LinkedIn, trying to justify why they hadn't taken BiteSparrow's outreach seriously last quarter. He should have, sent a deck that looked more professional. His email signature just said, "Lee, that's not how you pitch." A silence passed between them. "You think he heard us?" He quoted our exact joke. "Ah, yeah." They turned to their drinks, which suddenly tasted a little bitter. Then came the peak moment. A reporter from TechBridge Weekly, who had asked to sit in the press area specifically to avoid startup nonsense, was now frantically rewriting her headline. Her notes from earlier still sat open in her notebook. "Delivery guy. Why is he still here? Poor event security?" She scratched those out furiously. Wrote instead, "The most powerful man in the room was the one you laughed at." The father and son, the teen with the designer hoodie and the smirk, were now having an interesting conversation of their own. "You recorded him?" The father said flatly, "Just the beginning, before we knew who he was." "Delete it, too late. Already got 70,000 views." The father turned sharply. "Then make another video." "A real one." The boy looked up, eyes wide. Saying what? Saying you were wrong, the son blinked. But I didn't, you did. Silence. Then the father added, so did I. The boy swallowed hard. At that very moment, Lee's mother, a small woman in her 70s, wearing a faded green blouse with faux stains near the cuffs, was sitting in the back of the kitchen at her restaurant, unaware that her son had just flipped an entire room upside down. She didn't know her son was trending globally. She only knew that her hands were sore, and the beef bones needed to simmer longer if the broth was going to taste right by dinner. Back at the convention, someone finally approached Lee. It was the woman in pearls, the one who had pursed her lips at him like he was a stain on the floor. She walked up slowly, cautiously, holding a glass of wine she hadn't sipped from. I just wanted to say, I didn't recognize you earlier, she began. I know, Lee said gently. She faltered. I thought you were. I know, he said again, with a smile that had no edge, only truth. She looked down, her voice small. I'm sorry. Lee studied her face, then nodded. I hope, he said softly. Next time you'll ask before deciding. Then he turned to walk away. She didn't stop him, but she did stay frozen, holding her wine glass like it might shatter. 10 minutes after the keynote, Lee's inbox exploded. It wasn't just congratulations. That was expected. It was the timing that made it funny, how quickly people remembered his name once it was trending. His old economics professor, who once told him engineers don't build companies, they fix them, sent a 3-word email. Proud of you. No punctuation, not even a hi Lee. Another came from a VC firm that had ghosted his team 6 months ago. Would love to reconnect. Let's grab coffee sometime soon, our treat. And another, hey Lee, just saw your keynote. Amazing stuff. I think our visions really align. Let's talk synergy when you're free. He chuckled. He typed 1 sentence in reply. Happy to discuss if you still think I lack presence. Leon hit send. Elsewhere, in the hallways of the convention center, one particular investor was having a minor identity crisis. He had been seated 2 rows back during the keynote, nodding along like he understood everything. But now he was pacing near the exit sign, nervously chewing the inside of his cheek. He had laughed at Lee earlier, loudly, had said, I don't trust any founder who still carries their own lunch. Now he was texting his assistant, find me everything on Byte Sparrow, and do it fast. When his assistant replied, already trending #1 on Crunchbase. And The Verge just pushed a feature article. He sighed deeply. Then looked up at the screen in the main hallway, where Lee's face was still frozen mid-speech. He muttered to himself, I'm such a damn idiot. Next to him, a startup founder raised an eyebrow. No worries, the founder said dryly. We're all idiots. Some of us just get micked first. Meanwhile, at the media tent, chaos had erupted. Reporters who had skipped the keynote to chase another blockchain panel were now scrambling to write something meaningful. Before the story got away, one guy from a business podcast stood with his mic out, repeating, I called this. I totally called this, despite having absolutely no audio to prove it. A social media strategist frantically clipped together footage of Lee walking on stage and paired it with dramatic piano music and the caption, they laughed. Then he spoke. Now they're silent. Within an hour, it had 3.7 million views. One of the early commenters wrote, this feels like a Pixar movie for adults. Another, I didn't know I could cry from a guy in a soup-stained coat. Inside the building, something even stranger happened. People started to imitate Lee. A few attendees took off their suit jackets and draped them over their chairs. Some tucked their lanyards into their pockets. A man in Allbirds and a crisp dress shirt walked over to a volunteer and said, thank you for your work, seriously. A woman who had earlier dismissed a food server now handed him a bottled water and said, you matter. The server just blinked and walked away, confused but hydrated. One ambitious young entrepreneur pulled out his phone and posted a selfie with the caption, "Staying humble like Lee Tran." The background showed him in front of a Tesla Model S. Lee saw it later and laughed. He forwarded it to his co-founder with the subject line, "We broke tech Twitter." Not everyone handled the shift well. In the executive suite on the top floor of the venue, a private investor panel had been in session during Lee's speech. None of them had attended. When they emerged and saw the crowd buzzing, one of them frowned. "What did we miss?" A junior analyst replied, "That guy you turned down last year just gave the most viral keynote since Steve Jobs." The investor blinked. "Which guy?" "The delivery guy." A pause. "You mean that Vietnamese kid who pitched us with a napkin prototype?" The analyst didn't say anything. "God damn it," the investor hissed. "Get him on the phone." "We tried. He's booked for 2 weeks. Double it. Offer him a term sheet. Already signed with someone else." The investor groaned, then looked around the room and muttered, "I swear to God, if one more underdog founder gets a standing ovation, I'm retiring." Back downstairs, the man himself was sitting in the courtyard garden, sipping cheap green tea from a paper cup. He was finally alone, but not for long. The teenage boy with the designer hoodie approached, this time without the phone in his hand. No smirk. Just 2 hands tucked into his pockets and a look that didn't know where to land. "Hey," the boy mumbled. Lee looked up. "I recorded you earlier, before the speech." Lee nodded. "I know." The boy winced. "I posted it. Made some dumb joke. It got shared a lot." Lee didn't speak. "I'm sorry," the boy said. "Like, really?" Lee studied him. "Are you sorry for posting it? Or for what you thought when you saw me?" The kid blinked, then swallowed. "Both." Lee looked out toward the fountain. The wind picked up slightly, and the koi fish in the pond rippled under it. "You've got a big audience now," Lee said. "You can post something better." The kid nodded. "I will." Then, after a beat, "Can I repost your speech?" "Number. Jokes this time. Just the story?" Lee smiled faintly. "Sure, but you gotta spell my name right." At that moment, in a suburban kitchen across town, Lee's mother sat down with a bowl of rice and pickled cabbage, flipping through channels on a small TV in the corner. She paused when she saw her son's face appear on screen. She squinte, then smiled, and went back to her rice. Later that evening, inside a private dinner suite on the 17th floor of the convention center, a small group of angel investors gathered for what was supposed to be a victory meal, pre-reserved, prepaid, and very exclusive. They were supposed to be celebrating the new tech darlings they'd discovered. But instead of laughter and backslaps, there was silence. Every conversation led back to one person, the one they hadn't backed, the host. A balding man in a tailored navy blazer with a Rolex peeking out from his cuff tried to lighten the mood. With a joke, I mean. "At least none of us told him to go fetch coffee, right?" No one laughed. One woman, a partner at a fintech firm, sighed. "I literally said, I don't talk to non-decision makers." Another man muttered. "I asked him where the bathroom was." The silence that followed was worse than any scolding. At the same dinner, a new arrival walked in, a woman with striking white hair and sharp heels. The entire room stood. She was the CFO of one of the event's main sponsors. She waved a hand. "Sit." They did. "I just had a fascinating conversation with Mr. Tran." Collective head turns. "Turns out," she continued, "we almost passed on integrating his language engine into our global platforms last quarter. Lucky for us, a junior engineer insisted." She paused, letting that word sink in. Junior. "Suggest," she said coolly, "we listen more carefully to our juniors." One man raised a timid voice. "Are we still the lead sponsor for his next product launch?" She smiled. "No, he's declined. He said something about building his own table instead." Back downstairs, near the coat check, A woman in her 60s was standing awkwardly near the elevator bank. She clutched a program booklet in her hands like it was a Bible. She'd watched the keynote from the lobby screen. Too embarrassed to re-enter after she and her husband had scoffed at Lee earlier. Something about these immigrants getting too comfortable. Now her eyes were glassy. As Lee walked by on his way out, she stepped forward suddenly. "Excuse me." He turned. Eyes calmed. She held the booklet to her chest. "I just wanted to say that I was wrong. My husband and we didn't know who you were, I understand. We thought you were a delivery guy," he said gently. She nodded, ashamed. Lee waited a beat. "And what if I was?" Her breath caught. He didn't say it with anger. Not judgment. Just wait. Just truth. She blinked back tears. "You reminded me of my father," she said. "He came here with nothing. I forgot that." Lee nodded. "Memory is a muscle. It gets stronger when you use it." He smiled softly, then walked away. She stood there long after he disappeared. An hour later, Mira sat at a corner bar, 2 blocks from the venue, still processing the day. She scrolled through the livestream replay, rewinding one particular moment, when Lee looked into the camera and said, "I hope next time, when someone walks in dressed like me, you'll see what I see now." Possibility. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she smiled because she knew that line wasn't just for them. It was for her. 2. Back in the garden, under string lights that buzzed faintly in the early evening air, Lee sat alone on a bench, watching the city shift from gold to blue. He could hear faint laughter from a rooftop bar. Could smell garlic bread from the trattoria next door. He looked down at his hands. Same hands that used to scrub dishes. Until 3 a.m. Same hands that once patched a coat for his mom using dental floss. Same hands that built code between shifts. Same hands they laughed at. Same hands that now held the world's attention. Gently, he pulled out his phone. One message blinked at the top of the screen. From Dad, Vietnam, saw you on news. Mom says don't forget to eat soup waiting at home. He smiled, replied, "Be there in 20 minutes. Tell her I want extra basil." He stood, slung the delivery crate back over his shoulder, not because he needed it anymore, but because it had become part of his spine. And as he walked away, a group of young founders standing nearby fell quiet. One of them said, "That's him." Another whispered, "Should we go talk to him?" The third just said, "No, let's listen instead." It wasn't the conference that broke him, not the laughter, not the sideways glances, not even the moment he walked on stage and saw the exact same people who had dismissed him, now staring like he was a ghost of something they buried. What broke him was the silence after, the kind that follows thunder, the kind that reminds you how loud your own memories still are. Later that night, long after the last panel had ended and the velvet ropes had been unhooked, Lee found himself sitting on a wooden bench outside the convention center. Just him, his jacket, his old crate, and the weight of everything he hadn't said. He didn't notice the woman approach until she sat beside him. Meera. No clipboard, no headset. Just a cup of coffee between her palms and dark circles under her eyes. They didn't speak at first. The city moved around them. Headlights, muffled laughter from passing cars, the click of heels on concrete. But in that small patch of stillness, it felt like they were somewhere else. Somewhere older, truer. "You did something today," she said eventually. Her voice was quiet, almost like she didn't want to disturb the night. Lee looked straight ahead. "I did what I needed to," he replied. Mira nodded slowly. "That line you said about possibility. You said it like ... like you've said it to yourself before." He chuckled. It wasn't bitter. Just tired. "I used to whisper it like a prayer," he said. "Especially that night under the bridge." She turned to him. "What bridge?" He exhaled, long, measured, like he was about to say something he'd kept caged in his chest for too long. Highway 280, he said. Exit 19B south of San Jose. She waited. December 2015. It rained for 3 nights straight. I had just been denied my work visa extension. No income. No ID. My roommate moved out. I couldn't pay rent. I had a storage unit, a bike, and 3 boxes of leftover curry rice I got from a food court I used to mop floors for. His voice didn't break, but something beneath it did. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I tried too hard. Maybe I should just go back, work for my uncle's scooter repair shop and forget all this. He paused, but then I looked up. Mira tilted her head. There was this crack in the bridge, just above the place I laid my jacket. Rainwater dripped through it like a metronome, steady, relentless. And I kept thinking, if that drop can break through concrete, maybe I can too. He gave a small laugh. It was stupid, but I held on to that thought for hours. I built my company with that rhythm in my head. Mira's eyes glossed over. You never told anyone that? He shook his head. They only want the hero's story once it's dressed up. They don't want to see the guy holding his shoes in a plastic bag, so they don't get soaked while sleeping on cardboard. She whispered, I would have listened. I know, he said. That's why I'm telling you now. They sat for a long time. The moon had risen. The air smelled like wet concrete and magnolias. Then he said softly, I still have that cardboard. I folded it, wrote on the back with a Sharpie, start here. Keep going. You kept it? It's pinned behind my monitor. Every time I feel like I'm not good enough, I look at it. And I remember that version of me, the one who had nothing and still didn't quit. He turned to her then, eyes full but clear. The real keynote wasn't for them, it was for him, that boy under the bridge. I owed him an ending. Mira couldn't speak so she just reached over, rested her hand on his, and let the silence say what words couldn't. Mira didn't move her hand. And Lee didn't pull his away. There was something grounding in that, like for the first time. All day, he didn't have to hold himself up alone. The street lamp above them buzzed faintly. A moth spun in slow circles around it. Then Lee spoke again, his voice low, steady. There's another reason I kept the jacket. Mira looked at him. I figured, she said softly. But I didn't want to ask. She gave it to me. He said, my mom. Mira stayed quiet. Lee stared at the empty sidewalk ahead like he was looking through time. She bought it from a clearance bin at a supermarket when I was 17. Said it was waterproof. Said it made me look like I had a job even when I didn't. She told me, when people don't know your name, they'll judge you by your jacket. So wear one that makes them guess wrong. He smiled, but there was a sharp edge under it. She used to put notes in the pockets. Little folded pieces of paper, reminders, encouragement, grocery lists. Once, I found a $20 bill and a note that said, buy a book, not a burger. Mira let out a quiet laugh. She sounds like she knew you'd be something. She believed in me before I believed in me, he said. Even when I failed. Even when I gave up. Then the smile faded. She passed away during the pandemic. March 2020, stroke. Mira looked over sharply. I'm so sorry. Lee nodded. She'd been alone. I was stuck in Seattle on a pitch tour. The borders were closing. I tried to get back, but I missed it by 10 hours. He blinked once, slowly. She died in her kitchen, making broth, alone. Silence again. I buried her in that same jacket, he said. Not this one, the first one, the real one. The one with holes in the cuffs and burned faux stains on the sleeve. Mira's throat tightened. I asked the funeral home if I could leave one last note in the pocket. He turned to her now. His voice didn't shake, but it dropped to a whisper that held more weight than any scream. I wrote, you were right. They guessed wrong. And I never forgot your recipe. And that was when Mira cried. Not the kind of cry that needs Comfort, but the kind that rises like steam when someone else's truth hits too close to your own. She wiped her cheek with the back of her sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a long pause. He nodded. Double quotes after all this. "Why didn't you just put on the suit? You knew what they'd do when you showed up looking like a delivery guy?" She bit her lip. "Yeah." He looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, but they were there. "I wore this because I needed to prove something, but not to them." He tapped his chest. "To myself. To the kid who slept under the bridge. To the boy who translated his mother's pharmacy receipts. To the man who still wonders if he belongs." He paused. They could laugh, they could roll their eyes, but they couldn't say I faked it. Mira stared at him, quiet for a long while. Then she said, "I've worked with hundreds of founders. Sat in on 1,000 pitches, but you." She shook her head. "You didn't pitch, you preached. And I don't mean religion, I mean something bigger. Something true." Lee smiled again, this time with no sharpness at all. "I wasn't trying to start a company," he said. "I was trying to start a conversation." Somewhere down the block, a garbage truck rumbled past. Lee stood slowly. The weight of the crate didn't seem as heavy now. "I should get going," he said. She wouldn't want the broth to get cold. Mira stood too. "Your mom?" "No," he said. "My neighbor. Old Vietnamese woman. Reminds me of her. I bring her soup on Fridays. Habit." He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. Mira watched him for a beat, then stepped forward and hugged him. Not out of pity, but out of deep, genuine respect. He returned it, carefully but completely. As Lee walked by on his way out, she stepped forward suddenly. "Excuse me." He turned. Eyes calm. She held the booklet to her chest. "I just wanted to say that I was wrong. My husband and we didn't know who you were, I understand. We thought you were a delivery guy," he said gently. She nodded, ashamed. Lee waited a beat. "And what if I was?" Her breath caught. He didn't say it with anger. Not judgment. Just wait. Just truth. She blinked back tears. "You reminded me of my father," she said. "He came here with nothing. I forgot that." Lee nodded. "Memory is a muscle. It gets stronger when you use it." He smiled softly, then walked away. She stood there long after he disappeared. An hour later, Mira sat at a corner bar, 2 blocks from the venue, still processing the day. She scrolled through the livestream replay, rewinding one particular moment, when Lee looked into the camera and said, "I hope next time, when someone walks in dressed like me, you'll see what I see now." Possibility. She didn't cry, she didn't need to. Instead, she smiled, because she knew that line wasn't just for them. It was for her. 2. Back in the garden, under string lights that buzzed faintly in the early evening air, Lee sat alone on a bench, watching the city shift from gold to blue. He could hear faint laughter from a rooftop bar. Could smell garlic bread from the trattoria next door. He looked down at his hands. Same hands that used to scrub dishes. Until 3 a.m. Same hands that once patched a coat for his mom using dental floss. Same hands that built code between shifts. Same hands they laughed at. Same hands that now held the world's attention. Gently, he pulled out his phone. One message blinked at the top of the screen. From Dad, Vietnam saw you on news. Mom says don't forget to eat. Soup waiting at home. He smiled, replied, "Be there in 20 minutes. Tell her I want extra basil." He stood, slung the delivery crate back over his shoulder, not because he needed it anymore, but because it had become part of his spine. And as he walked away, a group of young founders standing nearby fell quiet. One of them said, "That's him." Another whispered, "Should we go talk to him?" The third just said, "No, let's listen instead." It wasn't the conference that broke him, not the laughter, not the sideways glances. Not even the moment he walked on stage and saw the exact same people who had dismissed him, now staring like he was a ghost of something they buried. What broke him was the silence after, the kind that follows thunder. The kind that reminds you how loud your own memories still are. Later that night, long after the last panel had ended and the velvet ropes had been unhooked, Lee found himself sitting on a wooden bench outside the convention center. Just him, his jacket, his old crate, and the weight of everything he hadn't said. He didn't notice the woman approach until she sat beside him. No clipboard, no headset. Just a cup of coffee between her palms and dark circles under her eyes. They didn't speak at first. The city moved around them. Headlights, muffled laughter from passing cars, the click of heels on concrete. But in that small patch of stillness, it felt like they were somewhere else. Somewhere older, truer. "You did something today," she said eventually. Her voice was quiet, almost like she didn't want to disturb the night. Lee looked straight ahead. "I did what I needed to," he replied. Mira nodded slowly. "That line you said about possibility. You said it like ... like you've said it to yourself before." He chuckled. "It wasn't bitter. Just tired. I used to whisper it like a prayer," he said. "Especially that night under the bridge." She turned to him. "What bridge?" He exhaled, long, measured, like he was about to say something he'd kept caged in his chest for too long. "Highway 280, he said. "Exit 19B south of San Jose." She waited. December 2015. It rained for 3 nights straight. I had just been denied my work visa extension. No income. No ID. My roommate moved out. I couldn't pay rent. I had a storage unit, a bike, and 3 boxes of leftover curry rice I got from a food court I used to mop floors for. His voice didn't break, but something beneath it did. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I tried too hard. Maybe I should just go back, work for my uncle's scooter repair shop and forget all this. He paused, but then I looked up. Mira tilted her head. There was this crack in the bridge, just above the place I laid my jacket. Rainwater dripped through it like a metronome, steady, relentless. And I kept thinking, if that drop can break through concrete, maybe I can too. He gave a small laugh. It was stupid, but I held on to that thought for hours. I built my company with that rhythm in my head. Mira's eyes glossed over. "You never told anyone that?" He shook his head. "They only want the hero's story once it's dressed up. They don't want to see the guy holding his shoes in a plastic bag, so they don't get soaked while sleeping on cardboard." She whispered, "I would have listened." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm telling you now." They sat for a long time. The moon had risen. The air smelled like wet concrete and magnolias. Then he said softly, "I still have that cardboard. I folded it, wrote on the back with a Sharpie, 'Start here. Keep going.' You kept it?" "It's pinned behind my monitor. Every time I feel like I'm not good enough, I look at it. And I remember that version of me, the one who had nothing and still didn't quit." He turned to her then, eyes full but clear. The real keynote wasn't for them. It was for him, that boy under the bridge. I owed him an ending. Mira couldn't speak that, so she just reached over, rested her hand on his, and let the silence say what words couldn't. Mira didn't move her hand. And Lee didn't pull his away. There was something grounding in that, like for the first time. All day, he didn't have to hold himself up alone. The street lamp above them buzzed faintly. A moth spun in slow circles around it. Then Lee spoke again, his voice low, steady. "There's another reason I kept the jacket." Mira looked at him. "I figured," she said softly. "But I didn't want to ask. She gave it to me." He said, "My mom." Mira stayed quiet. Lee stared at the empty sidewalk ahead like he was looking through time. "She bought it from a clearance bin at a supermarket when I was 17. Said it was waterproof. Said it made me look like I had A job even when I didn't. She told me, when people don't know your name, they'll judge you by your jacket. So wear one that makes them guess wrong. He smiled, but there was a sharp edge under it. She used to put notes in the pockets. Little folded pieces of paper, reminders, encouragement, grocery lists. Once, I found a $20 bill and a note that said, buy a book, not a burger. Mira let out a quiet laugh. She sounds like she knew you'd be something. She believed in me before I believed in me, he said. Even when I failed. Even when I gave up. Then the smile faded. She passed away during the pandemic. March 2020, stroke. Mira looked over sharply. I'm so sorry. Lee nodded. She'd been alone. I was stuck in Seattle on a pitch tour. The borders were closing. I tried to get back, but I missed it by 10 hours. He blinked once, slowly. She died in her kitchen, making broth, alone. Silence again. I buried her in that same jacket, he said. Not this one, the first one, the real one. The one with holes in the cuffs and burned faux stains on the sleeve. Mira's throat tightened. I asked the funeral home if I could leave one last note in the pocket. He turned to her now. His voice didn't shake, but it dropped to a whisper that held more weight than any scream. I wrote, you were right. They guessed wrong. And I never forgot your recipe. And that was when Mira cried. Not the kind of cry that needs comfort, but the kind that rises like steam when someone else's truth hits too close to your own. She wiped her cheek with the back of her sleeve. Can I ask you something? She said after a long pause. He nodded. Double quotes after all this. Why didn't you just put on the suit? You knew what they'd do when you showed up looking like, well, like a delivery guy? She bit her lip. Yeah, he looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, but they were there. I wore this because I needed to prove something, but not to them. He tapped his chest. To myself. To the kid who slept under the bridge. To the boy who translated his mother's pharmacy receipts. To the man who still wonders if he belongs. He paused. They could laugh. They could roll their eyes. But they couldn't say I faked it. Mira stared at him, quiet for a long while. Then she said, I've worked with hundreds of founders. Sat in on 1,000 pitches. But you. She shook her head. You didn't pitch. You preached. And I don't mean religion. I mean something bigger. Something true. Lee smiled again, this time with no sharpness at all. I wasn't trying to start a company, he said. I was trying to start a conversation. Somewhere down the block, a garbage truck rumbled past. Lee stood slowly. The weight of the crate didn't seem as heavy now. I should get going, he said. She wouldn't want the broth to get cold. Mira stood too. Your mom? No, he said. My neighbor. Old Vietnamese woman. Reminds me of her. I bring her soup on Fridays. Habit. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. Mira watched him for a beat, then stepped forward and hugged him. Not out of pity, but out of deep, genuine respect. He returned it, carefully but completely. Then she whispered, You don't need a stage to change people, Lee. You just need a bench. He nodded. And walked into the night. The phone call came just after midnight. Lee was already home by then, his shoes off, a warm towel draped over his shoulders, the scent of lemongrass broth floating through his tiny kitchen. He didn't recognize the number at first. The area code was local, but the timing, unusual. He let it ring twice. 3 times. Then he answered, mostly out of habit. Hello? A voice came through, old, composed, and carrying that tone people use when they're not sure if they deserve to speak. Mr. Tran, this is Linda Hine. Lee paused. He hadn't heard that name in years. The voice continued, I don't expect you to remember me. But I remember you, very clearly. There was silence on his end, so she went on. 2015, April. A car accident on 3rd and Hollister. I was pinned inside a flipped Prius. You pulled me out before emergency crews arrived. You wrapped my arm in your shirt. You didn't even say your name. Lee's throat tightened. I didn't think you remembered, he said. I didn't forget. I just didn't know it was you until tonight. A longer silence this time. Then, with the kind of hesitation that only exists when pride has been punctured, I owe you my life. And tonight, I watched an entire room of people look you in the eye, and still not see you. Lee didn't reply. She exhaled. I'm not calling as a former mayor. I'm calling as a woman who failed to connect the dots. I should have recognized the quiet way you moved. I should have seen it when you spoke. But I was too busy being impressed with myself. He finally responded, his voice calm. I didn't do it to be remembered. I know, she said. That's why I can't stop thinking about it. Then, after a beat, I submitted a statement to the Chronicle. They're doing a feature on you, with or without your permission. I figured the truth deserves a place in the room now. Lee chuckled softly. So does the past, it seems. There was a pause. I also added a line, she said. 1. I hope they don't cut. What's that? That sometimes the people we're supposed to lift up are the same ones who already saved us quietly without asking for applause. He didn't know what to say. So she added one more thing. If you ever decide to run for office, she said gently, I'll volunteer on your campaign. The next morning, the story hit every major outlet in the city. The man who fed a city, slept under a bridge, and saved a mayor. On local radio, they replayed a 2015 emergency scatter call. Unknown male assisting extraction. Asian, mid-20s. Calm. No ID given. That was him. Now everyone knew. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a ghost in the city's past. A quiet thread that had held people together without them even knowing. In a high-rise office downtown. A powerful tech executive, one who had once refused to shake Lee's hand because he looked like he worked security, stared at the headline on his phone. Then he dropped it. Literally. Onto the tile floor. The screen cracked. He didn't bother picking it up. At a school across town, a young girl of Vietnamese descent sat in class, holding up her phone and showing the headline to her classmates. That's him, she whispered. That's the guy who helped me read to my grandma. And in that moment, she sat a little straighter. At Bite Sparrow headquarters, Lee didn't say much. He came in through the back, the same way he always did. He brought coffee. For everyone. Not as a gesture. Just as habit, when his lead developer walked past him and said, We're famous now, boss. Lee only smiled. I'm still not paying for ad space, he said. Then he walked to his desk, unzipped the old crate, and quietly pulled out 3 things. A photograph of his mother. A folded cardboard scrap with handwriting that read, Start here, keep going. And a post-it with the scribbled reminder, Buy a book, not a burger. He taped all 3 to the whiteboard next to his desk and got back to work. It started quietly, almost like an afterthought. There was no music, no stage lighting, no press releases. Just one empty chair. Someone had placed it on the main stage of Hall A, off to the side, with no label or explanation. Draped across it was a familiar blue jacket, old, frayed, unmistakably. Lee Trans. Most attendees didn't notice it at first. A few whispered, confused. A volunteer tried to move it, but was stopped by a producer who simply said, Leave it. Then, as the next session began, a fireside chat on leadership and crisis, the guest speaker, a retired general-turned-startup CEO, walked on stage, glanced at the jacket, and paused before sitting. After a long breath, he turned to the crowd and said into the mic, That chair isn't symbolic. It's real. It's for the person we ignored before we were forced to listen. A reminder that dignity doesn't require a spotlight. It only asks that we stop assuming who belongs. The room fell into a heavy hush, the kind you don't break with applause. From that moment on, Something shifted across the entire venue. At the Bite Sparrow booth, where people had once passed by with a glance or a scoff, a line began to form, not to ask questions about funding rounds or technical specs, but to leave. Messages, handwritten notes, crumpled scraps of notebook paper, post-its in 4 languages, all taped to a large white foam board that someone had scribbled over in marker. To Lee, we saw too late, but we see now. Some were simple. I laughed. I'm sorry. Others cut deeper. I called you the food guy. You changed my daughter's life. One read, you gave my immigrant father a voice, and I gave you my judgment. Forgive me. By noon, the board was full. By 1, volunteers had to bring out 2 more. In the hallway, a group of custodial staff quietly pooled their own tips and pay from the weekend, bought lunch for the entire Bite Sparrow team, and left it at the booth with a single note. From those who work the floors no one sees. No press, no announcement. Just quiet respect. And then came the moment no one expected. Back inside Hall A, a crowd had gathered not for any speaker, but just to sit. It was unprogrammed, unscheduled. The stage was empty. The lights dimmed low. But still, they came. One woman stood up from her seat, walked slowly to the center of the stage, and knelt. She said nothing. Her name was never announced. But her presence broke something open. One by one, others followed, an event sponsor in a $1,000 blazer, a tech blogger who had mocked the speech, a young intern who had once posted a TikTok laughing at Lee's coat. They knelt, some with heads bowed, others with hands clasped, not in prayer but in apology. They didn't do it because they were told. They did it because silence demanded it. And perhaps because, for the first time, they were listening to something. They couldn't unhear. Lee wasn't there. Not yet. He was on the other side of the venue, sipping hot green tea, unaware of what was unfolding until Mira, eyes red but smiling, appeared beside him and whispered, "You need to see this." He followed her back into Hall A. When he stepped into the room, every head turned, not with awe, not with reverence, but with something far more honest, remorse. Slowly, the kneeling crowd rose to its feet. No applause. No cheers, just a soft rustling of coats and bags and breath. And then the ripple began. One person moved aside, then another, forming a silent path from the door to the stage. Lee walked through it, not hurried, not erratic, just present. The same way he had walked onto the stage the day before, only now every step landed on ground, no longer cracked by assumption. When he reached the front, he didn't climb onto the stage. He simply turned and faced them. He stood still for a long time, letting the quiet settle. Then, finally he said, "You don't need to kneel. I never asked for that. I only asked that you look again, truly look, and not through the lens of what someone wears or where they come from." No one moved. Lee's voice softened. Dignity isn't something you grant. It's something you recognize. And it's never too late to start. And that was it. No mic drop, no standing ovation. Just a slow collective breath as the entire room standing took in the weight of those words. This time, they didn't stand to clap. They stood because sitting down would have meant pretending they hadn't changed. And none of them wanted to go back to who they were the day before. The next day was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from emptiness, but the kind that follows a storm that changed the shape of the land, permanent, subtle, and deep. The conference center returned to normal rhythms. People packed up their booths. Volunteers folded tablecloths. The banners were taken down. The screen that had once shown Lee's face now flickered with a slideshow of sponsor logos and thank you notes. But something in the air had shifted. Conversations were softer. People held the door open longer. Eye contact lingered, just a beat. More, nobody said it out loud, but everyone moved differently, like they were trying to walk forward while carrying the weight of what they now knew. Lee didn't stay for the final closing ceremony. He'd never liked endings with confetti. Instead, he went back to where it all began. A small, narrow alley behind a faux restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a florist. The alley still smelled like damp cardboard and dried herbs. The old crate leaned against the back wall, just like always. He knelt beside it and opened it one last time, not because he needed to, but because he wasn't done remembering. Inside was a small envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with tape. He peeled it open carefully. It was his mother's handwriting, on paper that had once been folded into the pocket of that first jacket. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. Even when they don't see you, keep walking like they do. One day they will, and when they do, forgive them. That's the difference between surviving and living, he read it once. Then again. Then folded it back and tucked it into the lining of the crate. He stood, stretched his shoulders, and looked up at the sliver of sky above the alley. Pale blue, soft around the edges like it didn't want to startle the world today. He smiled. Not because he had won, but because he had arrived fully, without having to lose himself along the way. Across town, a girl was writing an essay about someone who inspired her. She wrote about a man in a soup-stained jacket who taught people to listen without shouting. In a city office, a mayor drafted a citywide initiative for immigrant entrepreneurship programs and named it the Quiet Builders Fund. At Bite Sparrow's website, a new tagline appeared: built by those who were once ignored, for everyone who never should be. And somewhere, in an old apartment with creaky floorboards and a flickering light bulb above the stove, a grandmother stirred broth with a younger neighbor beside her, a man who showed up every Friday with groceries, never late, never loud, always with that same gentle nod that said, "I'm here." No headlines, no applause, just a presence. A week later, when the last of the news stories faded, a janitor on the night shift walked past the now empty keynote hall. He stopped at the stage. On it was a single object, forgotten by the cleanup crew. The same chair with the same blue jacket, still draped across it. He walked up, adjusted the sleeve so it wouldn't drag, then took a deep breath, and sat in the chair for just a minute. He didn't know the full story. He didn't need to. He only knew that for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible in that room, and that, more than anything else, is what hope really looks like. It doesn't shout, it stays. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't want revenge. All he wanted was to be seen. And now that they finally saw him, really saw him, he forgave them. Not because they deserved it, but because he did. Hope doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it wears a frayed jacket, carries a crate, and shows up every Friday with soup. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel, reflect, or breathe just a little slower, share it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for more stories that remind us we all matter, especially the ones no one expects.